I have chosen to talk about stigma in mental illness because this was one topic which was very, very close to him. And also because I met him for the first time in 1996, 20 years back, at the WPA Open the Doors initiative for fighting stigma. 20 years later, a recent editorial in The Lancet begins like this. Many people with mental illness experience shame, ostracism, marginalization due to their diagnosis, and often describe the consequences of mental health stigma are worse than those of the condition itself. Further, it goes on to say, along with pharmacological and psychological therapies, stigma interventions have emerged as the potentially valuable complementary tools. That's how big is stigma in psychiatry today. What I plan to do is to share with you in the next 30 minutes 4 aspects. What do we know about stigma? What have been the methods people have used to address stigma all over the world? Thirdly, I want to share with you my personal experience of addressing this issue in the last 40 years of my professional career and present to you some thoughts what we should be doing in the next 5 to 10 years or 20 years in this area. Before I begin, this week seems to be an India week in Madrid because you have the India summer. The weather is hotter than Bangalore from where I came. This weekend you have the Indian film stars coming to have a big function in Madrid, and I'm here. Thank you very much. I am starting with this because this is a slide not produced by an Indian. This is produced by the Medscape, a set of about 50 slides tracing the history of brain healers through the history of psychiatry. It's worth looking at it. It's a beautiful set of slides from then on to the current ones. It starts with, interestingly, a text from India, philosophical text from India called Bhagavad Gita. This is a text describing the meaning of life, the purpose of work, and the detachment by the Lord Krishna to a warrior who says that I don't want to fight. So it's a description of 5,000 years back of both mental illness and solution to mental illness in a non-stigmatizing manner. I'll come back to that a little later. Our colleague will be talking to you a little bit more about the recent advances in brain, but I think brain understanding is taking a totally new paradigm, and the connectomes and all the other technology that's occurring is going to make us think of mental health in a very different manner, and you'll hear a lot more of it from Costa Silva. At the same time, this is a picture from one of the Lancet issues of last week, where they talked about how mentally ill are still kept in chains in Indonesia, and talks about what we need to do about it. So this is the complex world that we are in. Advances of a fundamental nature about understanding brain and mental illnesses, mental health problems as old as 5,000 years, if not earlier, and chaining of people which is inhuman from many things. Interestingly, when you look at the publications on stigma, there were hardly any publications till about the 1990s. It's interesting. After that, you see, every year we have about 400 to 500 publications. It's enormous. Everyone is talking about stigma. I personally attribute this to the fact that we moved people away to the community. We recognized the human rights of the mentally ill. So stigma became what we did with them earlier was to protect them. But now suddenly their rights and their quality of life became important, so stigma became an issue. Just to take you through some of the important ones, Surgeon General's first report on mental health talked about stigma attached to mental illness is the main reason for more than half the people in America not getting the treatment they need. When I worked with the World Health Report as the chief editor in 2001, we put the recognition, avoidance of stigma and discrimination as a very important step that should be taken to meet the complex needs of the people. And then Dr. Saracino had this to say 15 years back. This is a wake-up call for us and for the world. The current situation paints a dismal picture of neglect and severe lack of resources. The sooner we face up to this reality, the more prepared we will be able to provide care and cure. We have made progress, but still this remains a task not fulfilled. In the last 20 years, there have been a series of meetings. One of them was in London, which was a very big meeting looking at stigma and discrimination. And Dr. Sartorius, Stewart, and Julio have brought out this fantastic book, Paradigms Lost, Fighting Stigma and the Lessons Learned All Over the World. This was published in 2012. I'll come back to that in a minute. About 2 months back, the Institute of Medicine, Washington, produced this fantastic book, Ending Discrimination Against People with Mental and Substance Use Disorders, Evidence for Stigma Change. This is a 150-page, loaded with all the literature in the world, critically acclaimed, and concludes saying that it will take us another 20, 30 years to fight stigma. I'll come back to that in a minute. One other very important document that came up in the last month, which was released in April in World Bank, is this review of the situation of mental health by the World Bank. And it says, stigmatization of and discrimination against people with mental and neurological disorders is common in all sections of society, from community to schools, and stigma and discrimination present formidable barriers to social inclusion for those affected and their families, and to access appropriate health care. So this is a very well recognized problem. And number of journals have focused whole issues on stigma, like the Indian Journal of Social Psychiatry. It talked about the menace of stigma, solutions to stigma, an instrument for studying stigma. Another special issue of World Cultural Psychiatric Research brought together about 12 different experiences from all around the world, from Brazil, Japan, Indonesia, Pakistan, India, all of these places. It's a fantastic resource of how stigma is experienced, how stigma is influenced by cultural factors, and how stigma can be addressed in different cultures. Worth reading it. It's available freely on the internet. As all of you know, many countries have started their own anti-stigma programs. Just 3 of them to illustrate the things. Time to Change is a program with about $60 million for the last 10 years. In Canada, we have Open Minds program. In Australia, we have the Beyond Blue. The World Psychiatric Association itself has recognized that we need to make families and the patients partners in our fight against the stigma of mental disorders, and came up with this recommendation, which again is a very good one. My own association with Professor López-Ibor was for 20 years, but the highlight of our association was 4 years back when he chose me for the López-Ibor Award for 2012. And I feel very grateful because that's the highlight of my professional life. As I said, he was one of the 4 core members of the WPA work, along with Dr. Sartorius and my teacher, Dr. Vig from India. And what is important is that this program took off in more than 20 countries and developed collaborative way of addressing the problem, both stimulating and supporting each other from the different countries, and it's been a fantastic experience. I also want to recall the senior López-Ibor and their contribution. This is my wife, who should have been here, but I miss her on this very important occasion. Coming to the stigma itself, you see that the experience of mental illness has changed over time. When people thought they were bad, we thought of controlling them by putting them in jails. When we thought of them as mad, we put them in asylums or mental hospitals. Then when we thought of it in the last 100 years, they are sad. Not bad, not mad, but sad. We thought of community care, and now we are talking about empowerment. It's equally important to recognize that at different times we have looked at care of these people differently. For example, this is a quote from the 19th century writings. moral treatment consists of removing patients from their residence to asylums. Similarly, Dorothea Lynde Dix, who herself set up nearly 20 psychiatric hospitals in America and USA, said hospitals are the only places where insane persons should be there. They should not be at poor houses, mad houses, and at home, and they should be removed. I mean, just to say, ideas keep changing. From then to the current thinking of WHO, where we talk about self-care, informal care, as a foundation for mental health care rather than professional care. It's a long way, and I think this is the right way to address stigma. All of you know, as mental health professionals, stigma is multidimensional, multifaceted. It comes from historical factors, it comes from cultural factors, it comes from religious texts, it comes from association with violence and mental illness. It comes from where we have been treating them, like mental hospitals, jails, and other places. And also it comes from discrimination that exists in legislation. So the problem is not at one level, it's at many levels. However, the problem gets manifested at three levels. One is at the structural level, that's at the level of policies, programs, and legislation. At the public level, which comes at the level of attitudes, prejudice, discrimination, and more importantly, it also comes from self-stigma. The ill people themselves feeling that they are somehow different, they are less than human or less than other people. So these are the three types of stigma that we have to fight. And the importance of stigma fighting is it denies human rights, which is well recognized today compared to what it was 200 years back. It prevents the services being set up, and when it's set up, being utilized properly by the people. It excludes people from society. It excludes them from employment. It discriminates them in housing. In point of fact, the Lancet editorial goes on to talk about homeless mentally ill is the biggest challenge in the Western world. And lastly, in the criminal justice system, there is again discrimination, diminished responsibility, and things like that. There have been a large number of suggestions what we should be doing about fighting stigma and discrimination. All of them are relevant, from increasing awareness, increasing knowledge, increasing service utilization, decreasing negative attitudes, increasing social tolerance, increasing social participation, reducing discriminative behaviors, improving housing, advocacy, education, employment, changing legislation. All of these are important. Each one of them will contribute in some way or the other for the improvement of the situation. Interestingly, in the last 2-3 years, there have been these 5 or 6 meta-analyses that is available for us from looking at all the studies that have been done. For example, Griffiths looks at the effectiveness of anti-stigma programs, both in short term and long term, and concludes that long term is what we should be aiming for. Henderson looks at healthcare settings as the source of stigma, particularly the way we organize our services, the way we deliver services, the choices we make of pharmacological agents which produce side effects, which make them easily recognizable with extrapyramidal and obesity and other things. And the Indigo study, looking at the major depressive disorder, found very striking differences across different countries. What is considered important, what is considered desirable, what is considered undesirable, and it's a source for local action rather than uniform action. Thornycroft has done wonderful reviews. The latest one was published in the March issue of Lancet, which I quoted, where he shows that 2 or 3 things he says. One, most of the work has occurred in the developed countries, not in the developing countries. Number 2, the countries with the short-term programs, the effect has been very limited, and strongly says that we need to develop 5, 10, 15, 20-year programs rather than 1 year, 6 months, 2-year programs. More importantly, he says that there are very limited number of evaluations of these programs, and research into this area should be given a high priority. Now, I mentioned about the book of Paradigms Lost. If you have to go back and say, look, I'm interested to learn everything about stigma, I would strongly recommend this book to you. Because the authors, Stewart, and Sartorius, take up these 11 paradigms, and each one of them provide evidence whether it is right or wrong. They conclude with sufficient evidence to say that stigma exists in developed countries, in developing countries. Stigma requires both well-planned plans, but at the same time, small activities can be useful. Science is not the only guiding principle. We should be thinking of the cultural factors, the local factors, and it can be led by anyone. And just improving knowledge is not enough for stigma fighting. Attitude change is a partial indicator of stigma, because very often attitude change doesn't get converted into action. Community care is not always destigmatizing. Sometimes it can contribute to stigma. And anti-stigma campaigns both work and don't work. And mental illness is not like any other illness, is not a good analogy to use in all the cases, because once you show it as genetic, you can get into problems of heredity and discrimination. If you show it as a brain disorder, people will say that means he is not accountable, which also means he can be punished without any feeling that he is being punished for something which he was not responsible. And lastly, they say, though all these things are true, stigma can be also fought, and there are good examples in the literature. And the second part of the book gives actually how to go about organizing an anti-stigma program in great detail, including the tools for each one of the things that we have talked about. The Institute of Medicine book, which I referred to you, is again another source of very critical, comprehensive coverage of this area. They again emphasize, as you can see here, that the levels of action has to be very, very many, and different type of actions have to occur, not just education, but most of the people at this point of time recognize live contact of recovered patients, patients living with the mental illness, with the ordinary population is probably the most effective way of fighting stigma, as it happened in HIV, AIDS, and others. All of you know that HIV, AIDS is only about 40 years, 30 years old, but it has made much more progress than centuries-old psychiatric problems in our culture. Now, from all these things, what are the conclusions we can draw? The conclusion that can be drawn are stigma is multifaceted in origin and consequences, so the interventions have to be multiple levels and coordinated to achieve results. And the most programs, or any program, should not be followed for 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. It should be planned for something like 10 to 20 years. Then only you will see results. A new generation has to grow up with the ideas. And all programs should be bottom up, not top down. In the sense, you need to study what is the manifestation, what will work, and make local needs as the focus of it. And as I said earlier, contact programs are an important way of addressing the stigma in the community. And we need to, I'm going to talk about that a little bit to illustrate it, move from a dialogue of deviancy towards mental health to normalcy. You will ask me, what is this? And I'm going to illustrate that with you from my example. And make mental health skills, not mental health knowledge, not mental health attitude, but mental health skills to become a way of life, what Norman Sartorius calls, make mental health high in the value of individual's life, then only you will fight stigma. I'll come back to that in a minute. My own work, very briefly, started about 1975, and when WHO brought out used to bring out this magazine in those days, a special issue on mental health in December 1977. It called it Healthy Bodies and Healthy Minds. And as you can see, what you have is people doing a number of things. Ordinary life, dancing, playing, creative activities, and that was the way it presented. I wrote an article at that time called Reaching the Unreached, and my own work has been to make services decentralize, deprofessionalize, and personalize the services. This we have done it in India by integrating mental health with primary health care, making it possible for ordinary health workers, ordinary doctors, non-specialist doctors, to provide essential mental health care so that it can become easy to use, easy to complete, and less stigmatizing than coming to a psychiatrist. The second set of areas where I worked a lot after the Bhopal disaster in 1984, and subsequently in conflict situations like Somalia, Sudan, Iraq, and Afghanistan, is how to provide mental health care for people living in difficult situations, where their mental health is compromised by the very nature of the setting in which they live. There again, we have used not looking for mental disorders and providing treatment, saying that everyone living in this situation requires mental health skills, and make that skills available to them in a manner that they can use it. I'll tell you about it in a minute. However, my real challenge came up 3 years back when I was in a similar journey as Professor López-Ibor. Because of my illness, I came face to face with cancer, and I suddenly realized 3 things. Firstly, emotional aspects of cancer is as important as the cancer itself, or more important than the cancer itself. Secondly, there is no existing, at least in India, emotional support to the person and the caregivers to handle, how to maintain their mental health, how to handle their crisis. Thirdly, if you want to do that, you have to have a different paradigm than referral. What happened was about a year back when I recovered from my illness and said, let me do something in this area. When I went to the hospital, the existing psychiatrist said, doctor, no one refers any cases. There are no cases, why are you coming? I said, look, I know something different because I have been through the journey. So what I did was, I went to every single patient who was receiving his chemotherapy, sat next to the bed and said, look, I'm here to help you strengthen your mental health so that you can handle your illness better. I didn't ask him, do you have anxiety, do you have depression, do you have sleeplessness, do you get irritable, do you have suicidal ideas? I said, we have enough information to show that if your mental health is good, your ability to handle the cancer is better. And there is enough evidence for that. It's not just a slogan. So I sat down with them, listened to their stories, then developed a self-care program for the caregivers and a program which is based in our cultural setting for the patients. Like, for example, this is a yoga session in our hospital, and developed 10 items which relate to self-care of the patients, 10 items which they can do, like writing their experiences, externalizing their interests, sharing of their emotions. I'll be happy to send you more details of this to anyone. So it is possible by moving away from the deviancy model to normalcy model and making it an essential part of the recovery process to make mental health acceptable to the people. I'm coming to the end of my presentation. However, we have very big challenges. Let me tell you one challenge which I came. About the time when I was finishing the chapter, in India, the Supreme Court judge said, being a judge is a very taxing thing. We have very high burnout among the judges. It came out in the paper. I'm not talking anything, something private. So I wrote to them saying that, look, we have skills to address this problem, emotional skills which can make them understand it as well as cope with it. It's now 6 months. I sent them some literature. I said, I'm willing to come and listen to you and do things, and nothing has happened. The point which I'm making is, somehow we are not seen as being relevant to the ordinary lives of the people. That is a big challenge that we have. So looking ahead, we need to think of many levels of interventions. For those countries where there is no mental health care, getting people off the streets, off the severely dehumanizing mental hospitals, and providing them humane care itself will be a very big thing. Like, for example, the Indonesian situation, Somalia situation. The second one is to open up the mental hospitals, all psychiatric facilities, like it happened in Italy 40 years back in 1977, and make it a community-based one. When people see their neighbors, their friends, their community living with mental illness, attitude change than when they are kept behind doors. Third very important one, which we made in the World Health Report, is to integrate mental health as an essential part of the health system, education system, welfare system, so that they get to talk about, listen about, and get interventions as part of the total care rather than having to go to a psychiatrist. I'm happy to say that though 1 year back they said there are no referrals, every day I have more than 5 to 6 patients I see when I go to the hospital, and if I could work 12 hours a day, I would have enough patients in the same hospital where they said there are no psychiatric problems. The fourth one is we need to, in the Western countries, particularly economically rich countries, think of personal contact with persons with the diagnosis of mental illness and show the humanness of it, show the recovery part of it, and also the reason, the need for these people to be cared for by the society. Lastly, this is my favorite slide, that like it has happened with other issues, whether it's wearing spectacles or the beauty business, they don't say if you're ugly, you come to the beautician. They say you can become better. You can become better, and sorry, I'll come back to that in a minute. And if we were to present it, that mental health dialogue in a normalcy model, I've written a lot about it. I'll be happy to share with you, and I'm working upon it in the future. So the whole thing was put in this excellent book called Emotional First Aid by Guy Winch. He makes this point. I'm coming to the end of my presentation. We teach our children how to take care of their bodies from a very young age, and they usually learn lessons well, whether it's a cut, whether it's a wound, whether it's a bruise. But ask an adult, what should you do to ease the sharp pain of rejection, devastating aches of loneliness, the bitter disappointment of failure? They will not know about it. So he asks in this book and provides answers and says that for 6 problems, he looks at what can be done by the individual themselves. For loneliness, for trauma, for loss. It's a brilliant book. And he says that we should stop presenting mental health in a neutral information level to a skills-oriented thing. For example, I tell my patients with cancer, particularly at this point of time, look, physical activity is very important. It's very important for you to find time to do pleasurable things every day. When you are upset about something, if you cannot share with anyone, sit down and write for 20 minutes. Use your spiritual background to understand your illness, your suffering, your uncertainty. No, these are skills which they can use it. Hey, then they say yes. I mean, they're amazed that these things can make them feel better. When they feel better, they continue to use it, and that makes them better. The challenge for us, this is my last comment I'm going to make, is to identify those mental health skills that matter to the ordinary people, not to the mentally ill people, not to the one with anxiety or obsessive compulsive neurosis or PTSD, and develop methods to help people to include it in their personal lives and give guidelines when they should seek professional help. Such an approach has occurred in nutrition. It is occurring with physical activity. Can we do it for mental health activity? This is the challenge for us. One day I would like to see, like this advertisement which is selling everything from better air, better water, I would like it to be including better mental health. Similarly, the way they present, make your eyes happy. They don't, for example, wearing spectacles used to be a problem. Now they say make happy because it's designed, it's very attractive. Similarly, the last one. This is a fantastic slide. You know, this is a slide showing that there are variations among people. You can move from level 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, and you can do something about it. And that makes you feel better. Now, if you were to present mental health, and I am submitting to you with all sincerity, it is possible to do it, and I am doing it every day with the most challenging group of people called cancer survivors. So, I come to the conclusion. In every country, I'm just presenting my country's picture. If you go any street in India, you will see these pictures relating to yoga. It's very popular. It is being practiced almost by everyone. And this is something which is historical, 5,000 years old, and is something which is accepted by the world, where tomorrow they are going to practice it. And I conclude with my inspiration from my father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, who said, what seems impossible is not really always so. If only we can understand and address it at the level at which it is occurring, rather than go with the idea, I must give this medicine and get my this one, or I must propagate my profession of cognitive behavior therapy, or this or that. I hope I've been able to present something which was very, very close to Dr. López-Ibor, fighting stigma. He worked on it from 1996, and I hope we will all work on it to make the stigma disappear, which will be a fitting tribute to his memory as well as his wishes. Thank you very much.